So, the creation story. If you've spent any time at all in Sunday school as a child, you've heard it. The creation story, Noah's Ark, Moses and the Ten Commandments, and the birth of the baby Jesus. Those are the heavy four that young children virtually always know. The creation story itself doesn't really change much from translation to translation, so whether you're reading the King James or the Good News Bible, the plot of the story remains. Eugene Peterson's message doesn't move the animals to appear on day 2 or wait to separate sea and sky till the very end. The book of Genesis comes to us, of course, from the Jewish Torah. And while the Quran itself doesn't tell the creation story, it does make reference to it. So it's an idea shared even amongst our friends and neighbors of other faiths. It's a foundational story. By the time we reach adulthood, even young adulthood, it's ingrained into who we are as a people of faith. We feel like we know it so well, we don't really need to reread it, even if we can't always put all the days in the right order. We believe the story has been told so often, for so long, that we know every detail. There's not really much left to be gleaned from it. Nothing new under the sun, some might say. In some faith traditions, people even go so far as to believe the creation story is the only story, that this planet is only about 6,000 years old, that dinosaur fossils were surreptitiously planted as a deceptive scheme to make us believe in science, and that a conversation can be closed off, completely shut down, with the words, God doesn't make mistakes. While I would argue strongly against most of that, I would certainly agree that God does not make mistakes. But God's creation is so complex, has so many little intricacies. The interactions of plants and animals, the sequence of dust and rain and rainbow, the cycle of life and death, are all part of a divinely inspired plan that is well beyond our full comprehension. But in this plan, I believe God has also deliberately left room for change, for growth, for imagination and new discoveries. No, God doesn't make mistakes, but rather creates spaces in which we can build and learn from our human errors. In my work as a pediatric chaplain, I've had the opportunity to use godly play as a medium to help children discover their own innate sense of spirituality. For those who are unfamiliar, godly play was created in the late 1990s by Montessori-trained Episcopalian minister Jerome Berryman. It is a method of telling the familiar Bible stories and parables with children that encourages them not only to listen and to learn, but to place themselves inside of the story through their creativity and their imagination. At the end of every story are the questions. Questions differ slightly from story to story, but they always begin with, I wonder. I wonder which one of these days you like best. I wonder if we can leave out any of these days and still have all the days we need. I wonder which day is most important. I wonder which day you are in, or which one is especially about you. Friends, I've witnessed the sort of thoughtfulness these questions can evoke. I have heard deep, profound, truly spiritual responses to these questions from children of all ages, as young as 4 and 5. Many of them already knew the creation story, of course, but it hadn't yet become so entrenched in their faith and their own sense of spirituality, so the children were not overly committed to an idea of what the story does or doesn't say. They felt free enough to imagine creation in different ways, and to ultimately understand that they too are a part of this wonder which God has made. Now, it's possible as adults that we may no longer have so much of our childhood innocence and imagination. Maybe we've become more entrenched in our thinking. Maybe after years of repeated and often conflicting messages about what it means to be a good Christian, we've adopted a sort of give in to get along sort of philosophy. All of those things are possible among us. And hey, peace in a household or in a work life is important. I am not advocating or judging against that at all. But this morning, I'd like to take a closer look at the creation story with you. Taking a cue from godly play, I invite you to wonder with me. First, we need to agree on something, right from the opening lines of Genesis 1. In the dark and formless void, God began creating. There is no mention here of Nigel, the faithful assistant, standing at God's side with pen and paper, documenting all the things that the Lord created. Probably because humans wouldn't come along for another 6 days, nor pen and paper, which came way later. But in any case, this is not an eyewitness account. And unlike the anti-dinosaur crowd, we presume a certain degree of inexactness from the very start. This lack of precision is not God's mistake, it's human limitation. I would have loved to have been God's note-taker, though. Since childhood, I've often wondered what a formless void, what a literal black hole of nothingness could possibly look like. The folks who do want to interpret Genesis 1 as an eyewitness account are often referred to as literalists. And on day 2 is where they begin to run into trouble. On this day, the story has God thinking meteorologically, separating water on the earth from the water in the sky. I wonder if these early writers were able to connect the clouds in the sky with the rain that fell on their homes and fields and villages. I wonder about the idea that at that time, what we now call the Middle East was lush and green and gardens of Babylon, and not the sandy yellows and browns that we usually think of today. I wonder if rain was a common sight, or something infrequent and uncertain, something expected or something hoped for. And I wonder how the literalists deal with no mention of any other precipitation. No sleet, no snow, no freezing rain, no slush. They aren't listed, but surely God created both the rain and the snow. Questions also come to mind on day 3, with the creation of plants yielding seed and trees of every kind bearing fruit with seed in it. Oh, I have lots to wonder about here. First of all, if no trees ever existed before this moment, God was creating ex nihilo, out of nothing, who exactly determined what every kind of plant and tree was? When did God know that we had enough and there was time to stop? Was there a list? And why the preferential treatment for fruit with seeds on the inside? I love strawberries. I had some yesterday. But their seeds are on the outside. Did God make a mistake there? No, we've covered that already. How about fruits with no seeds at all? The beloved navel orange. That was not part of the creation story. It came later in one of those spaces for innovation that God planned for us when we learned about grafting. I wonder if the literalists believe in strawberries and navel oranges. I wonder in similar ways about the trees. Sure, pine trees have pine cones, oak trees have acorns, maple trees have those helicopter seeds. We used to stick them on our noses when we were little kids. But what about a bonsai tree in a tiny little box? Or a cactus? Or one of those rare Amazonian flowers that only blooms once a century and stinks to high heaven? Or one of those ubiquitous snake plants in offices everywhere that seems to do nothing but grow straight upwards at a completely imperceptible rate. Even though the story doesn't say it, we still include them all as part of God's wondrous creation. On a personal note, I myself probably wonder the most about the sun and the moon and the stars of day 4. Personally, I wonder why God didn't combine this task with day 1's separation of darkness and light, saving a day in the process. But God doesn't make mistakes, so I roll with how God wanted it. As to what is actually in the heavens, Venus might have been viewed as a star, but the other planets couldn't really be seen or even imagined at the time the creation story was written. I wonder about what's up there all the time. I wonder how much more is out there that we haven't discovered yet. I wonder how far out does the universe span? I wonder how many more universes there are. And always, as I ponder the sky and the stars and space, I think how amazing it is that no matter how vast we might imagine the universe to be, God is bigger. And that brings us to days 5 and 6. God did a lot of work on these days, as if all the preceding days weren't complicated enough. Sea monsters and swarms of creatures, birds in the sky, cattle and creeping things and wild animals, wings, gills, exoskeletons, antlers. Again, lots to wonder about here. I wonder if the platypus is a sea monster. I wonder where turtles and frogs really belong, in the water or on the land. I wonder why God made some birds that don't fly, like penguins and turkeys. And why, oh why, was there any reason to create scorpions and fire ants? I wonder if the Venus flytrap is a plant or an animal. And I wonder how people who read Genesis as the one true history of the world account for these omissions and contradictions. The 6th day. God did the most work on the 6th day. In addition to all of the land animals, God also formed us on that day. Each of us in our remarkable conformity, as well as our glorious individuality. Our blueprint comes from that day. I truly wonder how God came up with so many variations on a theme to create so many millions of us. During my recent hospital stay just a few weeks ago, I heard a television preacher on my roommate's TV say that it was silly to think that God created different races in Genesis 9 as the curse of Ham because, quote, obviously the different races were created in Genesis 1 when God was creating everything else, unquote. Since there is only man and woman, God created them in that first chapter, I wonder how two people account for the multitude of skin tones that cover our planet. But then again, I do always appreciate a viewpoint that doesn't invent ridiculous and denigrating reasons for the existence of people of all hues. My friends, I hope I've made clear here that while some of these musings can be taken with tongue placed firmly in cheek, there are also underlying concerns which in today's fractured world can have dangerous and harmful implications. With that in mind, I offer one last question. If we can understand that rain and snow are the same thing, if we can believe in strawberries and navel oranges and snake plants, if we can accept and include the platypus and the penguin and the Venus flytrap, I wonder why would we ever think that God would be so limited, so lacking in vision and power as to only create humans in a simple binary of male and female. I wonder where the ancient writers got the idea that heterosexuality is the only option God allows for. And how are we possibly supposed to believe that those who are trans or non-binary, queer, gay, lesbian, or not named are somehow segregated out of the great commandment to love one another as I have loved you? God's creation includes and has always included all of us in every conceivable permutation of our beautiful humanity. Our world's ongoing discoveries and innovations are part of the work of God's greater plan. The glorious possibilities of our collective future are meant for all of God's creation. How can we possibly believe otherwise? I can only